Hi, thank you for watching Yoga with Elia. This is Elia, and today I wanted to show you another very good posture, very important posture that we're going to use the yoga wall for. But if you don't have a yoga wall, just stick around. At the end of the video, I'll show you how you can set this up at home right now, or at least right after watching this video. Now, in a previous video, the one that I titled Bulletproof Your Lower Back, I went into some of the description on what happens musculoskeletally when our lower back degenerates, as it has a tendency to do living a sedentary lifestyle as modern people tend to do. Now, what I went over in that video is the yoga wall based exercise that'll help you reinforce and revivify the strength and the inherent musculature support for your pelvis and your low back. But when we talk about low back pain, you can think of there's two forces at work. One is we sit so much or we don't move around properly, and so we don't use our muscles the way that our muscles evolved to be used. And so that leads to the degeneration of muscle tone of the muscles that are relevant to the pelvis and the low back to maintain its healthy state and function. But the other thing you see that happens is by sitting so much, on the one hand, where we get to constantly overlook the use of our muscles, we also sit, and so that ends up putting extra load and weight on the spine. So then there's a compressive force. And when we train or retrain the muscles of the body to do the work that they were initially intended to do, it's going to help alleviate some pressure out of the joints. But if it's the case that the compression on the spine has gone on for so long that now it's caused some chronic compression of the discs, then we need to do something to decompress it. We kind of have to reach for another posture that'll help to lengthen, literally, create more space between the vertebra so the discs can lengthen. So let me grab my spinal model here. And just as a review, what happens, this is the lumbar spine, is from years of sitting, and even if you're not sitting, even if, say, you're an avid runner or jogger or hiker or cyclist, you're still right side up. The head is still above the low back. And so the weight of the entire torso is then landing and being supported on the low back. Now, you see these discs, they're designed to be shock absorbers. But if they're constantly incurring pressure and weight from the body and essentially from gravity, they don't ever really get to decompress, and so they don't ever really get to rest and rehydrate. Now, we hear that the human body, especially the adult human body, is composed of something like 60 to 70% water. Now, depending on the tissue in question, and especially when it comes to these discs are anywhere from 80 to 90% water. Now, what that actually means is when they're being used and they're working effectively, the cushioning and the shock absorption that they get to provide mostly comes from the fact that they're these spongy, watery elements that get to rebound and allow the spine to maintain its suppleness. But if we constantly put pressure on the lower back by always keeping the body right side up and never inverting or rarely even moving throughout a whole healthy range of motion, then these discs end up being, the water content in the discs end up getting pushed out. And this is an actual clinical term for degenerative disc disease that's also used. They call it desiccated. The discs become desiccated. That means they become dried out. And one thing that's been shown is that if you decompress your spine, so either from an inversion table or from just being upside down, like say on a yoga wall, the way that now you can use the rest of your torso's weight in placing it now below the lower back, where the head is now closer to the floor, you're using the weight of the body to create space between all of these joints, between all these vertebrae. So you take pressure off the discs, and the discs can therefore imbibe their hydration, their fluids again. So that's why we use the yoga wall, and that's why it's so important to understand at least the basics of how our low back anatomy is composed so that we know how to approach any kind of pathology surrounding the discs. Now, just as a further point of this, the reason that we want to be able to ensure and do whatever is in our power to maintain the health of the lower back discs is because if they get desiccated enough, if they get compressed enough, as you can see in this model, what will happen is the disc will start to herniate. We also hear that synonymously being called as bulge. And if that goes on long enough, the disc itself can actually rupture where the nucleus of the discs, that's more kind of like a jelly substance, start to leak out. But even before you rupture a disc, you still have a little herniation, a little bulge right here demarcated by this color red. And so what happens is if the disc starts to bulge out, you can see the yellow part here, that's your nerve. So that's a nerve root. It comes out of your spine. That's a part of your spinal column. And this, the entire lower back, pretty much, all of the neurology of the lower back, innervates your hips, your legs, as well as some parts of your pelvic floor. And so if you start to have pressure of these bulging discs on the nerve roots, you end up having what's called nerve impingement. And nerve impingement is how we actually start to feel pain. And if that goes on long enough, if this gets unaddressed, and we don't somehow find a way to decompress and rehydrate our lower back discs, you end up developing arthritis, because once the vertebra, when this disappear, once the vertebrae end up colliding on each other, and every time you move, the bones grind against each other, they start to develop what are called osteophytes. So they're these little bone growths, and that then begins to literally fuse. The vertebrae of your spine can literally start to fuse into each other so as to not allow much movement, because when your body needs to heal, when your body is in pain, and trust me, when you have a disc bulge like this, there's going to be pain. Your body's first and instant reaction is to freeze and not move. It's a part of the whole fight or flight mode. So when we freeze and don't move, that is really the same as just becoming sedentary again. So we have to find a way to move the body, to decompress the spine without irritating this any further. So let's see what pose on the wall is going to help us create these results. So then, if you have a yoga wall, you can have your strap adjusted or attached either at the top rungs or the middle rungs. For these purposes, it doesn't matter, because right now we are just solely attempting to decompress the posture. So I'm going to show this attached from the top, because for the most part, if you're attached high, that means you're going to be able to interface in opposition with gravity a little bit more. Because if things are attached to the top and you're hanging down below, you're going to be able to incur most of that gravitational force and therefore decompress your spine better. So if you have your belt attached at the top hook, you will generally, and this all depends on the person, depends on where you are, you generally want the bottom of the loop to be around knee level. Okay, but I'm going to show you with just a little bit more length. You can think of it this way. If the belt is longer, your pelvis is going to be closer to the floor, so then your spine won't be as vertical. Now, this is downward dog pose, Adho Mukha Svanasana. So as we know, downward dog, the spine doesn't really need to be that vertical, around 45 degrees. So how you start is you place yourself right against the wall. You want to make sure that your belt strap is placed right around the upper thighs. There's a distinction between your hip creases and your upper thighs. And so how you can find that is you could just place your hands on the front of your hips, keep your legs straight, and then just bend forward like you're going halfway through a full forward fold. And mark with your fingers where you notice the crease being made at the hips. And so where you want the belt in general is just a little bit below that new marked hip crease that you found. So I place the belt at the upper thighs. I walk forward first to make sure that the belt actually supports me and I can place my body weight into it. Then keeping my legs straight, I fold forward as long as I can. And of course at the end, you can bend your knees if it helps you get your fingers to the floor. Once you get your hands to the ground, here's the important part: how to step back without slacking the tension of the belt. So you want to make sure that your body weight stays supported in it. So my hands are here just supporting a little bit as I walk my feet back, little by little, until my feet actually get to the wall. And when they get there, you want to try to keep your heels, especially if you're new to this, a little bit wider than hips width. So I'm going to step my feet to these outer board planks and make sure that your feet, the soles of your feet, are at about a 45-degree angle as well. When you look at your toes, you want to make sure that your toes are oriented straight forward so that your hips are in a nice neutral position. And then once you get your legs situated, you feel the weight of your body supported in the belt on the thighs, and then you walk your hands forward. And this is the following, and the last part is, when you do regular downward dog, what we usually do with the arms is we push, right? We push away from the floor. But in this case, the objective is to try to walk your hands further and further away from your feet, further away from the wall. And you keep your legs engaged. It doesn't have to be overly dramatic, but just apply a little bit of pressure of your heels into the wall. Keep your quadriceps engaged. Let your head and your neck relax so that your head actually hangs. And then start to crawl your fingers forward. You want to be able to get to a point where you're just hanging on by your fingertips. And so if you maximize the distance between your hands and the wall or your feet, you're in effect also maximizing that distance, the space in the spine, which is exactly what we're looking for. And so you get into this posture, then you close your eyes. And in general, we stay in this posture for about 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes at a time. And then to come out, you're going to walk your hands in a little bit. In general, you want to reverse engineer the exit from the posture. So you keep your head down and you just walk your feet little by little away from the wall in the same way that you walked them towards the wall in the first place. And once you can actually feel the grip of the feet on the mat, keep your legs nice and strong and leaning your body weight against the belt, you slowly come on up. And then whenever you come out of that kind of an inversion at the wall, you want to step yourself back to the wall, close your eyes, and just let your body recover and recalibrate from all those new forces and experiences that were entailed in being upside down. For those of you that usually tend to run low blood pressure, if you feel the onset of lightheadedness coming up from these yoga wall poses, the best thing to do is just hold on to the wall, keep your eyes closed, and even take some big inhales. Try to really stretch out your abdomen, because when you inhale and you try to inhale a lot and dynamically, it actually helps you keep your blood pressure elevated. And so you do that until your body feels recuperated, and then you can go in for another round or even two. Okay, now here's the option for all of you that don't yet have a yoga wall. All you will need is a door, a belt, a yoga strap. If you don't have one, I'd highly, highly encourage you to invest in one. It'll last you for a lifetime. It has a universality of uses. It'll really become a good friend of you and your body and your practice. And the yoga belts that I think are superior to any other yoga belt on the planet, pretty much, is going to be from yogawall.com. I don't have any partnership or incentive with them to share their information. It's just good quality equipment, and it will benefit you. But if you don't get it from there, just get one that has a nice metal buckle and something that has good, tough material, because you want it to be able to support the weight of your body. And the other prop you will need is a yoga blanket, which is basically just a Mexican blanket. If you don't have one of those, you can buy one. Again, you can also supplement with a big bath or beach towel. So here's how we set it up. So you want to find yourself a nice sturdy door. Front doors usually are great for this. So you're going to open it, make sure that your belt loop is open pretty much all the way out. And then you're going to thread it around the back door handle. And before you close it, you want to make sure that you leave your belt doesn't cover the latch, and you want to make sure that the buckle is on the bottom part of the belt with the tail end like this facing away from the door so you can shorten it easily. So you keep that separated, close the door, give the belt a nice yank just to make sure everything is closed and held firmly tight. If there's a lock on it, might as well lock it to get that extra level of security. And there you have yourself a nice sturdy setup. Once you have this attached, you're going to have your blanket or your towel in one hand, and you're going to have your belt in the other. So I would suggest use one hand to just carefully place the bolster over your head. And if you walk forward a little bit, you'll put some tension in the belt, enough to just keep it over your chest so that you can place the blanket over your upper thighs, after which you can place the belt over the blanket. So once I get the blanket over the upper thighs, I'll step back. The belt will fall down towards the blanket, and then when I walk forward, I put some pressure and tension into the belt. I'll actually notice it because it's going to start to hold my body back. So like before on the wall, we want to make sure that this is supporting the upper thighs and it doesn't exactly go right into the hip creases. So like before, you're going to make sure that your feet are a little bit behind where your torso and your hips are, so that your body weight is already being supported by the belt, and you come down the same way. So you fold whatever it takes, 1/3, 1/2 of the way down. Once you're close enough to get your hands to the mat, you're going to step your feet back to the wall. The only difference between the yoga wall and the door version is you're going to have 1 foot on the door, 1 foot on the part of the wall that's right next to the door. But otherwise, everything is the same. Just make sure when you separate your feet, you're a little bit wider than hips width, and that your feet are separated evenly away from the midline of the body. So there's this equidistance between the left and right. That way, it'll have a good symmetrical effect on the hips and the spine because of that. So you're going to walk your hands forward, just like we did before, and just let your body weight fall into the strap. Let your neck and your head relax. And once in a while, as you apply a little bit of effort in kicking the wall, you're going to start to walk your fingers progressively further and further ahead. And so now that's the option that you can practice even starting today. Now that concludes our tutorial on doing a safe and most importantly, effective version of downward dog on the wall or using the door. And what I want to leave with is a little bit about when to do it, the frequency or the timing. And so with frequency, I would put it like this. We sit every day. Even if you're active, you're running every day or you're lifting weights every day, none of these things really happen when we're upside down, which means that even if we have an active lifestyle, there is no way to escape the fact that gravity continues to impose pressure on the lower back simply because our torso has weight, and the base of our torso has to suffer really the gravity, the pressure of the weight of our torso, no matter how light your torso is. And the best idea for any kind of attraction inversion practice like this is to definitely do it at the end of the day. After a day of sitting or running, walking, whatever it is that we do in our lives, it's really important to get some length back into the spine, get some length back into the system, some space back into our joints to allow our disc to rehydrate at the end. And as far as combining it with physical activity, I would also say do any kind of a stretching, lengthening, opening protocol after you do some activity. So if you went for a run earlier in the day, or you went for a run and you lifted weights, or even if you just did dynamic, more active version of yoga, which is, we know, as important, you still want to be able to finish your day with length, because all the time of being upright for hours on end still continues to compress our spine. So at the end of the day, we try to reverse all of those effects of daily living by decompressing the spine. Now, lastly, you might be wondering, why wouldn't I just get an inversion table? Why do I need to set this arduous yoga wall up, or even mess around with setting it up on the door? And the way that I would want to explain this is, again, using the spinal model. When you hang yourself by your upper thighs, you're essentially hanging yourself by your hips. So this is pretty much the angle that you're in that downward facing dog on the wall. And when you have a belt here at the pelvis restricting your descent down into gravity, it just allows your spine to incur all of this decompressive force. Now, the difference between this and using an inversion table is, well, first of all, if you don't know what an inversion table looks like, here's what it looks like. So as you can see, the difference there is that instead of being hung up by the hips and pelvis, people are hung up by their ankles. And so when you're upside down, the decompressive force is always going to be strongest at the point of support. So if the point of support or suspension, in this case, is the ankles are going to receive most of that decompressing force. And afterwards, what's right above the ankles is the knees, and then the hips, and then the spine. Whereas when you hang yourself by your thighs and pelvis, essentially, the pivot point, the support point, is going to be at the pelvis, which is exactly what the lower back attaches to. So all of that impact of decompression is going to get channeled directly into your spine and directly start to help you decompress these discs. And daily, to do it daily is definitely not overdoing it. It doesn't take much time. You do this for 2 minutes at a time. You can do it for 2 minutes a couple times and then just go on with your night. Or you could do it for 2 minutes a couple times midday and a couple of times doing it 2 minutes a piece at the end of the day. The most important thing is consistency. Consistency is everything. And this just points to the whole larger point of actually being compliant with our health and wellness practices. We don't need to necessarily invest 2 hours every day of working hard and sweating and busting it out just to be healthy. There is a bare minimum that we could do to still ensure that our spine doesn't degenerate. And remember, we have to take care of our spine more so because of the neurology surrounding the spine. Once the discs get bulged, desiccated, degenerated enough, that's going to eventually start to affect how your nerves communicate and innervate the muscles of the legs. So people that have that kind of severe nerve impingement and even nerve damage that stems from disc degeneration in the spine, oftentimes they do start to develop leg weakness, and that weakness also starts to show up in weakness of sensitivity of the legs and the feet. And once we reach a certain point of degeneration somewhere, it's really difficult to backtrack. So remember, what you do now is investing in the future of your well-being. Now, coming out of one of these poses, if you try it the first time, yes, you might not feel that different, although many people do. But what we're looking at here is we're playing the long game. We want to be able to ensure that in 20, 30, or more years' time, we actually have a life that has quality, and we're not beaten down by our own injuries. We're not beaten down by the environmental and physical forces that are constantly bearing down on us. So make sure that you do this consistently, and I will see you very soon. Thank you for watching. Namaste.